Hoop 7 proudly brings to you Basketball Hustle, featuring your hosts, the writer, Chris Pike, and the scoring machine, Sean Redditch. Now it's time for another episode of Hoop 7's Basketball Hustle.
Hello and welcome to Hoop 7's Basketball Hustle. We're right in the middle of an NBL Grand Final Series, and it seems like the whole world's been turned on its head, including this Grand Final Series. All of a sudden, we went from potentially playing in front of 30,000 people last weekend to playing in front of probably 500, thanks to, I guess, the health and safety measures required, thanks to the threat of coronavirus. So the good news is we're still playing this NBL Grand Final Series. Hopefully we get to finish it off in the coming weeks. So that's what we're here for on Hoop 7's Basketball Hustle. Let's get straight into it. I'm Chris Pike, but as always, joined by the man that you all want to hear from, who was in the building, one of the few people in the building on Friday night at RAC Arena, Sean Redditch. Sean, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Pikey. It's crazy times out there. Let's try and dissect all the craziness as best we can.
Yeah, never. I don't think any of us have seen anything like this in our lifetimes. 2 weeks ago on the show, we talked about how you had a Redditch basketball tour planned for the United States. You had to cancel that because of coronavirus. We thought at that time that was a pretty big deal, and maybe that was as bad as it was going to get, hopefully. Fair to say that's been put into perspective by what's happened in the last 7 days especially.
Yeah, it's been incredible times. I think it's, I guess for me, it's just how quickly it's rapidly increasing in what's happening on a almost minute-by-minute basis, not even hourly. It's, news updates, this and that, how many more cases of coronavirus, which country's shutting down, no travel. It's been incredible, and I think it's something that those that are living through this at the moment will remember this for the rest of our life, and really will stick in our memories for a long time.
Yeah, it sure will. The fact that I guess sport's not everything, and this puts it into perspective. But when you have sporting events actually cancelled, and I think the NBA was the start of it. Once the NBA, postponed their season about this time last week, or maybe it was Wednesday last week, that really set off the spiral of events. When we recorded our show last week, previewing games 2 and 3 of the grand final, I don't think we had any idea that there was even a chance of playing in front of no crowds for the weekend. It just happened so quickly, and it was only announced on Friday afternoon that would be happening by the NBL. In your wildest dreams, could you ever imagine that we'd be playing a grand final series in front of, basically no people, no general public, when, like I said at the start of the show, there was every chance that a weekend like that could have pulled in 30,000 people 2 weeks ago?
Well, I think you make a good point about when the NBA came out and announced it. That was just the avalanche for everything.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I think every league kind of took notice that the NBA, possibly the popular or second most popular league and sport in the world, is shutting down. Everyone's got to look at their own league and say, hey, are we doing the right thing here? And then obviously most of them have come to that agreement that we shouldn't be playing. So it was, and then it all just happened so quickly. I don't think there's a sport in the USA that's going on at the moment.
No.
Probably. And if you think about it, Australia may have the only sports leagues going on at the moment. I mean, I know FIBA is all shut down. Basketball in Europe. I know Puerto Rico, where I used to play, they are shut down or postponed. So, the eyes of the world are on the Australia sports scene. What's going to happen with the other codes? Rugby decided to play last week. Thought that was an interesting decision with fans. So we almost had our prime minister there playing or watching, should I say. So it's an interesting dynamic that's happening. And even Friday morning, I was lucky enough. I took some of the players in my academy and my son's team. We went down and actually got to play on RAC Arena court before the Wildcats took their shoot around, and the boys were pretty pumped about that. But just talking to a few of the support staff of the Wildcats, they thought everything was as normal.
Yeah.
This was 8-9 a.m. on grand final game 2. They thought everything was normal. Even Damian Martin said by 2:00 he was still being told that crowds were allowed, and by I think it was maybe 2:15 they came out and made that decision. So I can only think there was a lot of discussion between a lot of different groups there on what should happen. You know, should we play in front of crowds? Shouldn't? If we do we make it a 3-game series? But obviously, you know, they made that decision, and it was a strange evening. You were there as well. And, you know, I thought it was smart by the Wildcats to actually just continue it as normal. You know, it was probably the least amount of applause Damian Martin has had when he got called out onto the court. I think I heard his daughter, Maggie, yelling from the sidelines, but she wasn't able to make up for 13,000 fans missing from the Red Army.
When we first got there, it actually felt like a pretty normal night, given we got there before the doors would have been opened anyway. But by the time the introductions were made and you realised that there was going to be only, well, I mean, there's probably 200 maybe of the friends and family that were sitting courtside, you knew it was going to be very different. The Wildcats decided, and I think probably rightfully so, to do everything the same in terms of the game night pretty much. The courtside announcer was still performing like he was performing to 13,000 people. The music was still playing. The band was still there. Was that the right decision? Is that the way you would have done it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was the right one. You want to try and give your team the best advantage as you can, and, you know, having the announcer get excited when you hit a three, or the crowd that was there was actually bigger than I thought it was going to be, and they were probably louder than I thought they would be, but obviously not able to replicate the 13,000. And, you know, looking back on it, it probably just highlights how important that Red Army is to the success of the Wildcats. I'm not saying it's everything. You still got to have players. Guys got to go out there and play their role and know everything. But there's definitely an advantage that the Wildcats have over any other club, and probably was highlighted by the Game 2 loss.
It's pretty famous or infamous, depending on your perspective. The foul count advantage that the Wildcats have had over the years in home games. Remarkable to think you take out the Red Army and there's the biggest differential in terms of fouls in favour of the visiting team in the history of RAC Arena, with the Kings receiving 10 more foul calls in their favour than the Wildcats did. Do you put that down to the Red Army? Do you put it down to the fact that the Kings were probably more aggressive, in fairness, and did attack the basket a lot more? Or a combination of both potentially? Because it's only human for the referees to react when there's 13,000 people making a big noise that they automatically assume that something must have happened to blow their whistle for.
Oh, I agree. I think, you know, you could say that they're trying to, but yeah, you are human. You're going to be affected by the environment that you're in. So the fact that they did get so many more fouls probably highlights that. The interesting thing, and I wasn't really expecting it too much, but the amount I could hear the coaches and the players from the sideline, I thought that was pretty interesting, that dynamic. Surely could hear Trev when he was upset with the referees. You know, I was sitting right next to the bench for most of the time. So there was one point where Bogut had that massive dunk.
Yep.
Looked over at the Wildcats bench, ran down, played defense, came back on the next time down the court, and was screaming at Trevor Gleason to put Jesse Wagstaff in. So I had never seen another player telling the coach who he should sub in. To me, made it sound like, you know, Plumlee can't guard me, so you might want to try someone else. So it was, that was probably, I guess, the highlight of my night. Just seeing that. I'd never seen that in sports before. So just shows you the mood that Bogut was in, and when he plays like that, he's pretty dominant.
I think I might read into that he really wanted to dunk on top of Jesse as well. That might have been something that he was thinking about too. Let's talk about the game a bit more. Sydney Kings ended up winning 97-83. I think it was a lot more than just the foul count differential that they played better in. They were on top pretty much the whole game. And Andrew Bogut set the tone. I think it was 17 points and 12 rebounds in the first half. He was massive. Clearly his best game of the entire season. He was fired up, and then he got some really good help. Obviously, Jae'Sean Tate was terrific. Ended up hitting all three of his 3-pointers on his way to 20 points. And Kevin Lish, he showed why he was the player that the Kings should have been waiting for to come back from injury. He had 19 points and he was outstanding as well. In the end, Bogut was great, but so was Cotton on the other end. The difference probably was that Bogut got some more help.
Yeah, it was a interesting game. I thought Sydney were the better team by far to win by, I think it was, 14 in the end. They just came out. They were really switched on. I thought that little triangle and two that they put on at the start of the game, we hadn't seen that all year.
Yeah.
I thought that was just kind of put the Wildcats on the back seat there a little bit. And I actually thought the Wildcats would make that adjustment in how they guarded Bogut from game 1 to game 2, because I thought he was pretty effective in game 1 as well, but they didn't. They seemed to just allow him to catch wherever he wanted and just play off him. And then, I mean, the guy's 7'1". You've got to meet him a little bit higher than right under the charge circle, or he's just he's too skilled to throw his right and left hand hook and score. So to me, Bogut's a real confidence player. So if you allow him to get going, especially early on, he's a bit of a nightmare the rest of the game, especially when he switched on like that. So, I thought, credit to the Kings. They came out, threw a little wrinkle, and kind of just gave them a little bit of an edge at the start, and they propelled themselves. And then Kevin Lish hit some daggers down. But, newly knocked down shot. Tate was really good. So probably the only guy that been missing is been Casper Ware. But, the Wildcats, Terrico White wasn't in it. They were missing their shots and just kind of looked a little bit out of sync.
Did you come away from that game feeling like the Kings had the momentum heading into Sunday?
Not really. And the only reason because I knew they were going back to another neutral court.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of felt like there was no real advantage. The Wildcats weren't fearing traveling back to Sydney. The probably two guys you worry about backing up are Bogut and Damian Martin. A 50% Damian Martin, he's still going to give you energy. You only need 10 minutes out of him, really. Whereas Bogut is pretty important. So to me, that was I kind of felt like the Wildcats, if they came out switched on, and they play well in Sydney. I mean, Clint Steindl just does not miss in Sydney. Bryce Cotton, I don't know his record in Sydney, but I do know his very first game was in Sydney, and we won and propelled us and get back in finals contention, ended up winning the championship. So I feel like Bryce Cotton loves it there as well. So for whatever reason, they shoot really well in the Kings Dome.
Yeah, let's take a look at that game 3 in a bit more detail. 111-96 win in the end for the Wildcats. Similar to game 2 in a lot of ways. The Wildcats were on top pretty much the whole way. They were up by 18 points, I think, during the second quarter. The Kings fought back and they got close and made it a contest down the stretch, but they never really threatened enough, I felt, to look like they were going to be able to overrun the Wildcats, and a lot of that was down to Nick Kay. Career best night from him, 30 points, 12 rebounds, 4 assists, but most importantly, they just kept giving him an open 3 up the top of the arc, and he kept knocking them down. He hit 7 out of 9 of them, and it was remarkable to see that they didn't make any adjustments to that. They seemingly were happy to let him keep shooting it. As you said, Clint Steindl had a good game as well, 3 or 4 from 3 for 13 points. Bryce Cotton did what Bryce Cotton does, another 31 points, and Miles Plumlee for the first time in this series at least matched Andrew Bogut, if not got the better of him on that game. There was plenty there to like from a Wildcats point of view.
Yeah, I think if you like the mindset that Plumlee, he probably has been a little bit embarrassed by his performance against Bogut the first 2 games. So to come back and have a little chip on his shoulder and play much better was good signs. But you go back to Nick Kay. I mean, Damian Martin would talk to us during games as well. Like, you have a scout for a team. Yeah. Obviously, Nick Kay's scout he's a good shooter, but he's probably not a knockdown shooter. Like, you're not going to treat him like Bryce Cotton out on the 3-point line. But there's scouts for game adjustments as well. Yeah. So if you got a guy that's knocked down 3 or 4, that hoop looks like it's the ocean. You've got to close them out. I mean, there was one stretch where I think Sean Bruce, this is after Nick Kay's hit 4 or 5. Sean Bruce, the ball gets passed to Nick Kay. He looks at Nick Kay. It's his rotation, and he runs to Bryce Cotton, who's already been covered by someone else. And Nick Kay knocks down his 5th or 6th 3. And you're just like, there's got to be some change there. I mean, going to halftime, Nick Kay's knocked down so many threes. You've got to make that adjustment. They didn't do that, and probably it's a big reason. But, I mean, Nick Kay is shooting the ball. I mean, coming into the series, I think he was at 43, 44%. Yeah. He might be up almost close to 50%. He might be the leading 3-point shooter in the entire competition at the moment, the way he's shooting it in the finals.
It's unbelievable. Differences, but it's a little bit different because we were there in person in Perth and we weren't there in person in Sydney. But what differences did you notice from the way the no crowd situation was handled in Perth to Sydney? Did you notice much different?
It was hard to tell on the TV because the angle, and I'm not sure if they did that on purpose or not, but the angle that the TV had no one on the side in Sydney.
Yeah,
whereas the
strange.
angle in
Perth did it the right way, where the crowd that was there was facing the camera. Sydney did the opposite, so we couldn't see anybody at all.
Yeah, so I don't know. It just seemed like just going off the TV and everything seemed a little bit quieter there. I don't know what they did game night. I did see the cheerleaders were still there, and some of the the mascot at one stage was just sitting down on his hands, not doing much. So it was. I'll be interested to ask some of the players if we get a chance to see what it was like compared to Sydney and Perth. And I don't know, but there seemed to be a lot more family and friends in Perth than there was in Sydney.
Now, let me get your thoughts. If you can put yourself back in the shoes of a player, because there's been a few Wildcats players that I've seen as beloved by the Wildcats fans as you. Maybe Damien Martin's the only one that gets a louder cheer than you did during your career. But also on the road, you were public enemy number one as well. So you heard it on the other side as well. So wherever you played, you had a big crowd reaction, either positive or negative, directed towards you. How different would it have been for you to play in front of nobody?
On the broadcast, I talked about it. It just felt like a preseason game.
Yeah.
Just kind of felt like you're not playing in front of anyone. It's kind of, there's not a whole lot of atmosphere. And usually in those preseason games, the coaches would talk to the team and the players like, we've got to create our own atmosphere. We've got to create our own energy here. And you kind of felt like that. Sydney, I thought, did a great job on Friday night. And I'm sure, it's a lot easier to cheer when you're knocking down threes and in the lead than when you're giving up points. But it's one of those scenarios where it kind of just takes you back when you fell in love with the game. You're just out there playing and trying to. But it's different because you're playing for a grand final. You're playing for a championship, so there's a different element to it as well. I'm sure it's the team that probably adjusts. I don't think both those teams got pretty professional players. I don't think it'll play a huge impact to them, but it's definitely there's definitely some changes that you have to make.
I want to touch on a couple of individual players. Now that we've got a 3-game sample size, Casper Ware and Terrico are clearly the two players that are struggling massively right now. If you have a look across the 3 games so far, Casper Ware, he's averaging 8 points a game. He's shooting 9 of 44 from the field and 1 of 23 from 3-point range. And Terrico White's not much better, very similar numbers. He's averaging 7.3 points a game. He's shooting at 9 of 30 from the field and 2 of 14 from 3. Do either of those show any signs of being able to turn it around in Game 4 or Game 5 if it goes that far?
It's bizarre. I mean, we've seen that from Terrico. There's times where he kind of goes in and out. I'm not sure he's 100% healthy, and maybe the same thing with Casper Ware. Maybe we don't know. I do think Casper, he's working extremely hard on the defensive end.
Yeah.
And so I think he's doing a pretty good job on Bryce Cotton, but Bryce Cotton just running around. And, maybe that's actually the beauty of Bryce Cotton as well. Not only is he scoring 30, but he's causing Sydney King's best player to go 1 for 23 from the 3-point line. It's 1 for 23. I reckon I could kick him and get 1 in out of 23, possibly, or granny style, or behind my back maybe, or 360. I could get 1 in. It's pretty incredible. So. You heard in that huddle that Will Weaver trying to tell Casper, just keep shooting. I'm not sure that is the best message. Maybe go do kind of what Melbourne United did with Melo Trimble when he was struggling for a little bit. Bring him off the bench.
Absolutely.
Let him be that impact guy. You got Sean Bruce. He's playing pretty well. You got Kevin Lish who can play. I think those guys could do 1, 2. Maybe you bring Casper Ware off the bench. I don't know. You got to do something though. You got to make a change somewhere to be able to get him going.
I go back to what I asked you probably 3 shows ago. In hindsight, do you think the Kings wish that they found a way to get Jae'Sean Tate into this roster for the playoffs? He could have played defensively on Bryce Cotton, and he was also shooting the ball pretty well. If you have a look at it, Craig Moller, Lucas Walker, they're not playing really any meaningful minutes at the moment. Do you think they might have regretted not making that call a couple of weeks ago?
Possibly, but I don't think anyone could have predicted that Casper would be playing this poorly at this stage, and that's the other thing. Casper's usually a pretty game player. I mean, I've seen him drop, what do you have, 38 here against Damian Martin at RAC Arena at one stage. So he knows how to play big games in front of big crowds and hit the big shots in the big moments. So look, there's possibly still two more games to go. So we'll see if that, but yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I think they had to, the only way he could come in is if there was a legitimate injury. So, you need to step on there.
I want to get your thoughts on the power forward matchup too. It's been probably the highlight of the series in a lot of ways between Jae'Sean Tate and Nick Kay, and their numbers are terrific from both of them. Tate's gone 17 points a game, 5.3 rebounds. He's shooting 21 of 32, and he probably needs to take more threes. He's shot 4 of 5 from 3 for the series, and Nick Kay, 20.3 points a game, 8.3 rebounds. He's shooting 21 of 37 and 10 of 17 from 3. It's been a fantastic battle between those two.
Yeah, they played up to that all NBL first team level. And the thing I like about Tate is he's a bull, but he's also got really good footwork. And you see sometimes he just gets the ball down on that block, and he is just going to go to work. He knows how to use that strength and body of his to be able to produce points and do some good moves. So he's impressed me with that. Obviously, we talked about Nick Kay earlier, but it is a good battle. I mean, I love to see those two. And the two guys just play hard. I mean, there's no fuss about it. They just go. They play hard. Probably Tate's a little bit more demonstrative and I guess gets excited a little bit more than Nick Kay. But I love how they both play. And I think Tate was probably the best signing that Sydney Kings had.
For sure.
Might have been their cheapest signing they had in the offseason, but he was probably the best one.
Yeah, he won't be cheap next season. We'll come back to your thoughts on how Game 4 and potentially Game 5 will play out in a little while, Sean. But how are you feeling 3 games into the series? 2-1 lead for the Wildcats. Do you feel like the Wildcats have got the edge? How are you feeling at this point of the series?
Yeah, I do think they have the edge. I think now that they're playing for that championship, they know they win, and there's a couple things there. One, obviously the championship's on the line. But 2, I don't think they want to fly back to Sydney. I mean, we're talking about going back to New South Wales, which is the heart of the coronavirus here in Australia at the moment. So there's a little bit extra incentive there in that regard. So I think there is that advantage. But the way the Sydney Kings, they're the most talented team in the league. So when they come switched on and ready to go, the toughest thing to do is knock a team out. So it's going to be a big battle if we're able to play Game 4.
Okay, Sean, let's just take a second to not only thank Hoops Heaven for the enormous support they've given us here on Basketball Hustle this season, because as we've said from the very start, we wouldn't be able to do this show without their support. But let's also encourage all of our listeners, whether you get the chance to head into their store in person at Murray Street in the Perth City, or if you can jump online at hoopsheaven.com.au, now more than ever, in these times where everyone is affected by the coronavirus in some way, shape or form, we need to stick together as a basketball community, and Hoops Heaven is no different. They won't survive unless we support them and continue to buy our goods from them and continue to support them. They do an unbelievable job of supplying us with everything you could ever hope for in a basketball sense. All of the sneakers in the world you could ever hope for, all of your NBA merchandise, your NBL merchandise, your Nike gear, your Jordan gear, your Adidas gear, anything you can imagine, you can find it at Hoops Heaven and at hoopsheaven.com.au, and we really need to support them now more than ever. They haven't asked us to put out this plea, but we need you to support them because we just all need to rally together in these tough times. So head to hoopsheaven.com.au, and thanks to their support here on the show, when you get to checkout, use the code word HUSTLE, that's HUSTLE, and you'll get a special discount as well, and they'll take care of you. So thanks again to Hoops Heaven for their support, but please make sure you support them at hoopsheaven.com.au. Okay, welcome back here to Hoops Heaven's Basketball Hustling. And Sean, you've played plenty of games in your career where you would count them as being tales of two halves. But we've got a show this week that's going to be a tale of two halves, because our first half, we were looking back on the Grand Final Series so far, and we were getting ready to preview what was lying ahead. But all of a sudden, news has broken as we're recording here that the series is now off. There'll be no Game 4. There'll be no Game 5. The 3 games that we've seen so far will be all that we'll see of this Grand Final Series. The Sydney Kings have made a decision based on what they've heard from medical experts back in Sydney that they aren't willing to risk travelling over to Perth, probably both for the fact of potentially contracting something in transit, but also for the risk of potentially being stuck in isolation in Perth for 14 days if WA's borders are closed. So I think the combination of all that meant that the players just weren't willing to risk it, and that means that the Kings informed the NBL. I think that's an important distinction. The Kings informed the NBL that they wouldn't be partaking in the rest of the series, so the NBL had no choice but to cancel Games 4 and Game 5. But now the championship winner for this season is still undecided. The league has said that they need 48 hours to decide. That's a lot to digest, Sean. What's your initial reaction to it all?
Initially, I just kind of felt like I think this is what I saw coming. Last Friday, you could see the way things were developing, how quickly it had gone in countries, say Italy and Iran and the US, and how quickly it escalated. You knew there was no way that they were going to be able to get to next Friday and be able to play the game, which was why I was surprised the league didn't come out and say it was going to be a 3-game series. But obviously you need both sides to agree to that. I don't know the ins and outs of how it played out, but we were discussing before this just briefly, in what world do you not determine that the Perth Wildcats are the winners now? They're up. It used to be a 3-game series in the grand final. Obviously, they went to a 5-game series a few years ago, but you played 3 games, and the Wildcats are sitting 2-1. And I'm sure people listening that might be over east saying, "Oh, he's just being biased." That's just, I guess, you have to declare the winner as the Wildcats. I can't see it being any other result.
No, I totally agree. And yeah, I mean, I guess we're at a risk of looking like we're taking a Perth bias because we're based in Perth, but I'd like to think I'm pretty level-headed when it comes to these things, and I'm not one of those Red Army comrades. I just think whoever was leading 2-1, I think is a good enough lead to be able to be awarded the championship. Most NBL Grand Finals have been decided over 3 games. Having played 3 games, you're more than halfway through the series. To me, it's a big enough sample size. To me, I just think it's a no-brainer. I get the feeling it's the Kings that are giving the pushback there. They're not willing to accept that they've lost the series while there was still 2 games to play, so they potentially could have still won it had they played those 2 games. So I think that's where the pushback's coming, but I think they lose that right because of the fact that they decided to not play the last 2 games. It wasn't the NBL cancelling the series. Is that how you see it? Yeah,
that's how I see it, but also, I mean, if you look at the rules, FIBA rules on, say, on a game, if you get past halftime, if you get past the halfway point and a game is canceled, we saw this with the Illawarra game earlier in the year where, the game had to be canceled because of the roof. And so whoever was leading at that point became the winner. I believe it was Illawarra that ended up winning the game, right?
Yeah, it was New Zealand that was winning the game.
So New Zealand was winning at Illawarra. That's right. And so New Zealand ended up being awarded that game. I think that's the same. We're over the halfway point. We've got a winner. It used to be a 3-game series. There was talk of trying to bring the game up, and obviously the Kings refused to do that. I obviously don't know the ins and outs of the conversations there, but that's a word that was in the media circle. So I think you've got to go with the Wildcats. But even if you do determine the Wildcats are the champions, what a shallow championship. You play these things, you work so hard, and you want to be able to enjoy the moment. And it's almost like Olympians when they get told 2 years down the road that someone tested positive for a drug test. Oh, and here's your gold medal. That's the way I see it and feel it. It's just not the same. And I think we're going to remember this season for a lot of great things, but this isn't one of them.
Before we get to that a bit further, there's 3 options that the NBL is obviously weighing up right now. One of them is to declare the Kings the champions based on the fact that they finished on top at the end of the regular season. To me, that just can't be a possibility for a lot of reasons. And, basketball's always been a sport which is determined based on finals, and there was a prospect that the Sydney Kings wouldn't even be in the grand final. So if you're going to make that decision, they would be champions, even though they wouldn't be playing in the grand final series right now. Melbourne United was incredibly close to knocking them out. So to me, that can't happen.
Let's say Melbourne United did beat Sydney Kings, and we were sitting here, Perth and Melbourne United, they had to cancel the series. In that scenario, you're saying the Kings should be awarded the championship?
Well, I guess that's what you'd have to do if you're awarded to them now based on that you'd still have to.
How bizarre would that be?
It'd be unbelievable. So to me, I don't think that can happen. And I guess the other solution now is that we don't have a champion decided at all, which I think would be disappointing because we've got 3 games into the series. So I think it's a big enough sample size, but I guess that's a real possibility of happening now that we just won't have a champion at all.
I just can't see that happening either. I mean, you've completed 99% of the season. If it was tied 1-1, yeah, I think you would say that, but I just can't think of any other. Well, we'll see what happens over 48 hours, but we haven't even got to that point. But if let's say the Wildcats already determined the winners, how are they going to celebrate? They got no fans that can be in the realm. Maybe they do a little FaceTime with all the fans, and everyone can jump on the FaceTime, and they could see them celebrating. And
you can't even have a reception in the city like you normally have because we're not allowed to have public gatherings.
That's what I'm saying. It's just it's a horrible. And let's go on to another point. We don't know where Damian Martin, what his future holds as well. I mean, was that the last time we got to see Damian Martin play? I don't know.
Yeah.
There's, it's certainly a possibility. And what a shame that, we don't get to see quite possibly the greatest winner that we've ever seen, and no doubt the greatest defender we've ever seen in the NBL finish his career the right way. So there's so many different storylines and levels to this that it's pretty incredible.
For Jesse and Damo especially, this would be their 6th championship. It couldn't mean as much as the first 5, surely.
No, I know Damo said, I think last year after they won that 5th, that was the most impressive, and just the way they went about it and how everyone had kind of written them off at that stage where they had lost so many games. So I don't know where this one sits, but probably not in the top 5, I would imagine.
Was there a possibility we could have had the series finished already? Say we were at the point last week where travelling across the country was always going to be a challenging thing to do it 3 more times for both teams. Once they were both in Perth, should have they stayed in Perth and played out the series in Perth and only had sort of maybe 1 day in between games and finished it off, and by Wednesday or Thursday this week it could have been finished? Should have that been a possibility? Or alternatively, once they were both in Sydney, should have they stayed in Sydney and done the same thing? Should have that been something that was more seriously looked at?
Yeah, I think it was definitely, something you looked at. I think the problem is you've got 2 conflicting sides that both want the same thing. So Sydney King, they want to play in Sydney. Perth want to play in Perth. Probably both sides aren't willing to budge, rightfully so. So I think that's the hard one. I was actually surprised it went ahead with the series on the Friday, just considering every other league had shut down, especially basketball leagues in the world weren't playing. But 2, when they went ahead, I was really surprised they didn't come out. I think we wouldn't have this argument if they just come out and said it's a 3-game series. And maybe they wanted to, and one side or the other didn't want that. Maybe that would come out in the press conference as well. 48 hours. To me, that seems like a long time as well.
It's a long time
in today's world. Everything could change in 48 hours here. Maybe coronavirus is all finished up and maybe we can play. I highly doubt that, but it's going to be a long 48 hours, I'd imagine. But I get a sense they already know what they're going to do.
In the Kings press conference, they talked about how, I think it was their CEO, Chris Pongrass, talked about how the Kings weren't willing to shorten the gap between games because they were worried about their players not being able to handle shorter breaks because they were conditioned a certain way. Is that a code for saying that Andrew Bogut wouldn't have been able to handle shorter breaks?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you're trying to take words out of there. You've got guys that, there's probably one guy that could back up is Andrew Bogut. He's done his whole career where they play 3-4 games in the NBA. He might not be used to flying commercial. And maybe that, I don't know if that was on the cards, but possibly that was something the NBL could have done, is said, hey, we're going to private jet, and this is what we're going to do to be able to get the series done. I'm sure they explored all those options. And look, I actually think the Kings are making the right decision here. I think it's got to the point, the traveling. I know for my family as well, I think my wife, she would have been pretty nervous about me flying at this stage. And that's just looking into kids as well. And then you look at all, you're just risking so much that who's to say, one of these players is traveling obviously the Wildcats were on the flight with someone with the coronavirus. last week. So there's just so many different levels to it that it's a scary time.
I think you're right. I think the Kings have made the right decision, and I don't blame the players at all for being concerned about flying across the country. They mentioned in the press conference that the medical expert that they had spoken to said that he wouldn't be willing to go over to Perth himself for a medical conference. So I think once he says that, the players are like, well, why should we be expected to? But he even went as far as saying he wouldn't drive an hour down the road right now to go to anything in the current climate. So I think once you've got a medical expert telling you that, I think it's a no-brainer. So I think if the Kings are given negative, I guess, press because of their decision, I think that's pretty harsh. The other question is, should have the NBL made the decision for them so it doesn't look like the Kings are the ones that pulled out, but the NBL decided to cancel it?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I hadn't really thought about that. It's obviously the Kings actually decided to hold the press conference and not the NBL. Makes you think, I don't know. I'll have to think about that one. I'm sure we'll learn a little bit more over the next 48 hours. And hopefully, the league is transparent about all this and they come out and say, look, this is what happened. This is, how it all played out. I think, this is this is unprecedented territory that we're in. So I think everyone's kind of learning what's the best case scenario here and how do we handle this the right way. So be interested to see the reaction from both teams once the decision's made, and also just the NBL just coming out. I think they've done a really good job over the last couple of years being forefront with the fans and just letting them know what's going on. And we haven't even really talked about it, but this was the final that I think the league wanted. The two biggest stadiums, Sydney, Perth, got Andrew Bogut, you've got, quite possibly the most decorated player to ever play in the NBL. And, we know what the Perth Wildcats are used to. So, and it was going to be probably the most attended grand final we've ever seen. So from that point of view, it's a shame. I haven't heard too many people talk about that, but we were going to get the most watched and attended grand final we'd ever seen. So it's a shame that it wasn't able to finish in the right way.
Yeah, it's a great point, because over 5 games, if it went that far with full stadiums, we could have had 70,000 people attend 5 games of NBL basketball in Australia, which is what this season deserved to have as a conclusion. It's been the tagline is incredible. It has been an incredible season in so many ways, and these two teams haven't disappointed. The 3 grand final games have been played at a very high standard. It's just the fact that I guess what's happening in the world has now become a bigger story. There's so many what ifs, and Paul Smith also mentioned this in his press conference that the Sydney Kings had about this announcement, where there's so many what ifs. What if we didn't have the FIBA break in between? The season would be finished right now. What if somehow this had been condensed? And there's so many what ifs, but it's just unfortunate that potentially the most exciting NBL season of all time has finished in the flattest possible note.
Yeah, it is a shame. The league is gone from strength to strength, and record numbers attending. Who gets grand final MVP?
It's another great point. Yeah.
I mean, Nick Kay has been outstanding. Bryce Cotton, I mean, it's between those two, obviously, but you probably got to go with Bryce Cotton. But I think Nick Kay is got to be considered as well. So, and then if you're on the Sydney side, let's say they do come out and say the Sydney Kings do they give a grand final MVP? I don't know.
Yeah, or do we get a grand final MVP if there's no winner? I mean, what happens there?
I've got to declare a winner. I just can't see. I just can't see that you play all this. You've played 3 games in the grand final, and they don't declare a winner. That would be tragic, I reckon. I'd rather them declare Sydney Kings the winner than not have any winner. Yeah, I just think you got to have a winner. I'm not out here to get a participation award. We need a winner, Pikey.
We do, but yeah, I mean, it just comes back to I don't think there's any other decision to be made except to give it to the Wildcats. But is the rest of the country, given their disdain for the Wildcats in basketball circles, is the rest of the country going to be willing to accept it?
I think you've just got to make the tough decision. I don't think it's that tough a decision, but I think you've got to make a decision and declare them the winner.
Okay, Sean. Now that we're getting very close to the end of our first season here on Hoops Heaven's Basketball Hustle, a big reminder to all our listeners that you've still got an opportunity to win your very own set of playing singlets. That's right, you can design them yourselves. You can put whatever you want on them. They'll get made and manufactured all just for you, thanks to ID Athletic. ID Athletic, one of our great partners here at Hoops Evans Basketball Hustle, have been kind enough to offer one of our listeners their very own set of playing singlets. So whether you're a social team, a junior team, whatever level of basketball you're playing at, you might not get to wear them, unfortunately, for a month or two now, thanks to everything we're going through. But once you hit the court again, you'll be able to look your very best in your own set of basketball singlets. So all you have to do is jump on Facebook, jump on our Twitter account, jump on our Instagram, type in Basketball Hustle, send us a photo of the current playing singlets that your team is playing in. Tell us why you need a new set of singlets. And next week on our very last show of this season, Sean Redditch, the scoring machine, will pick out a winner and we'll announce the winner, thanks to ID Athletic, of a brand new custom designed and printed and made set of basketball singlets for you and your team. So make sure you head to our social media pages, get your entry in, and also head to ID Athletic at idathletic.com for all of your basketball apparel needs. Now, Sean, in your basketball world, you're still playing, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, State Basketball League here in Perth at the Prairie Lakes Hawks, but thanks to the coronavirus, that's been thrown into turmoil as well. All of a sudden, the season won't be starting until the end of May. It'll be a significantly shorter season where you'll play each team once and then you'll start the final series. But it also looks like it's going to be going ahead without any imports. So now you had a sore knee the last couple of weeks. All of a sudden, you've got 10 weeks to get that right to start the season. What are your thoughts on now what's happening? It's obviously a smaller scale than what we're talking about in the NBL, but what do you think of what's going to happen in your state league season?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be. I've been a big proponent the last few years of actually making the SBL season a little bit shorter because I think it is too long. So maybe we're going to get a taste of what a shorter SBL season looks like. You know, there is. I don't know if it's been confirmed, but there has been talk that there's going to be no imports. If that is the case, you know, obviously you lose a lot of quality players. Just gives a lot of more opportunity for the local contingent, and I think it'll be pretty small ball in the SBL as well if that is the case. But actually, you know, if they can go from almost June to say August, shoot, I could play another 10 years, Pike.
You absolutely
3-month season. That's beautiful. But these 6-7 month seasons, I don't know.
That's exactly what you did last year. When did you start last year? About halfway through?
Yeah, it would have been around June, I reckon.
Yeah,
May,
so.
June, I think.
Yeah.
I'll have to go back into my diary. The time flies, but I think that was about right. So, you know, I think it just means your local contingent are a lot more important potentially.
And in the case of your team, when you've got sort of Ben Purser and Ryan Smith and young players like Mitch Clark and a pretty good contingent of young players, you're in a pretty good position.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one of the things the Hawks have. They've got a lot of young guys. There's a few guys that have been training that up and comers as well. So, you know, I think you kind of obviously you want some good players in the SBL, and that's why they do allow the 2 imports. But it's also a development league, so you want to give those guys a little bit more opportunity. They're just going to get them a lot more opportunity. So hopefully they'll go ahead in May. But as we've seen, they're just throwing a date out there. They don't know what's going to happen. It could change on a daily basis. So we'll see how this all plays out. It's just going to be so strange. No sport anywhere going.
Oh, it's going to be 2 months now, basically, that at least the sports that we're involved with locally are now called off completely. And it's really hard to imagine how the AFL and NRL can continue how they think they will.
Yeah, I don't think they will, especially if you're a league just starting. You can't really start 1 week, and then what happens if a player contracts it? What happens then? But, you know, like no sport in the entire world. It's just, you know, it's one of those things whenever there's been catastrophic events or whatever happening, you always kind of felt like sport was kind of that outlet that everyone had to, that, you know, if the things were going pear-shaped in the world, you could always have a chat about what your local team was doing, what they need to do better. That's not going to happen anymore. We no longer have that outlet. I guess maybe we turn to our favorite Netflix show and we can talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, do you have old tapes of your old games that you'll force the family to sit down and watch?
I don't think I've watched any of my old films, but maybe we can dust them off. I've never been one to kind of go back and watch. I've always been, I guess, looking towards the future. But you might have a little bit of home isolation that we might need to dust off some of those old films.
Here's the chance for sure. Now, I think what we've learned today, Sean, is that these things move incredibly quickly. Hopefully, everyone enjoyed the fact that we've recorded a show on the day that all this is broken, and we'll get the show out to you on that day. So hopefully everyone enjoys listening to that as it unfolds. And what it also tells us, Sean, is that because there's so much to still happen over the next 48 hours, there's news that I wanted to talk to you about today in terms of coaching jobs at Adelaide. Next star's already been signed that we just haven't had time to get to today. So what we need to do is have one last show next week where we'll also announce our winner of the ID Athletic competition for a free set of singlets. They might have to wait a couple of months to be able to wear them out on a court, but we'll announce our winner for that next week, and we'll wrap up what's been a pretty exciting season here on Hoops Heaven's Basketball Hustle with one final show next week, Sean. So for now, on this second last show, what can you leave our listeners with?
Yeah, it has been an exciting season. Probably not the way we wanted it to end, but I'm excited to see kind of what happens over the next 48 hours, how the league determines how they're going to play this out. And thanks to our listeners for listening. We'll try and go out with a bang next week, and hopefully be back bringing you lots of NBL basketball news next year. So stay safe, everyone. And we look forward to hearing you next week and see who our competition winner is as well.
Bye, have a great time.